In the heart of Europe, the Danube River carves its way through the Carpathian and Balkan mountains. It forms a gorge so treacherous, so violent, that for centuries it was considered impassable. They call it the Iron Gates. History tells us a simple story. A story of progress. Between 1890 and 1896, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, armed with dynamite and steam-powered dredgers, tamed the river. They blasted away mountains of rock from the riverbed, carved deep canals through solid stone, and opened the Danube to modern commerce. A triumph of 19th-century engineering. A testament to human will. But this story, the one written in our textbooks, has a fundamental problem. It isn't true. The official account of how the Iron Gates were cleared is not just an exaggeration. It is a mathematical and physical impossibility. They claim to have removed over 2.5 million cubic meters of rock from the bottom of a raging torrent, in a remote mountain pass, in just 6 years, using technology that was barely adequate for a common quarry. We are told to accept this as fact. We are told to celebrate the achievement. But we are never encouraged to do the math. We are never told to question the logistics. In this investigation, we will do exactly that. We will analyze the engineering reports, the photographic record, and the simple laws of physics. We will show that the story of the Iron Gates is a fabrication, designed to conceal a far more profound and unsettling truth. The question is not whether they lied about how they cleared the river. The question is, what were they hiding? Before we examine the numbers, we must first look at the place itself. The Iron Gates is not merely a river. It is a four-gorge system stretching nearly 100 miles, a bottleneck where the immense power of the Danube is forced through a narrow passage of solid rock. For millennia, its rapids, its underwater reefs, and its violent currents made large-scale navigation a life-threatening gamble. The water level could change by the hour, and the riverbed was a graveyard of sharp, hidden rock formations. The official narrative asks us to believe that this environment was the worksite for a massive, 6-year industrial project. Now look at the photographs from the time. They show us the result of this supposed project. We see the Sip Canal, the largest of the new channels. It is over 2 kilometers long, 80 meters wide, and carved to a depth of over 3 meters below the low water mark. Look at the walls. They are vast, sheer, and constructed with a precision that seems utterly at odds with the supposed methods. The official tool was dynamite. Dynamite shatters. It fractures. It creates chaotic, jagged surfaces. Yet in many of the images we see cuts that appear surprisingly clean, almost quarried. The scale is monumental. These are not small channels cleared of loose debris. This is industrial-scale excavation of bedrock. But where is the evidence of the process? The photographs of the era are strangely sterile. They show the finished product, or steam dredgers sitting in relatively calm water. They do not show the sheer industrial chaos required for such an undertaking. Where are the images of thousands of workers living in sprawling camps carved into the gorge? Where are the photographs documenting the daily struggle, the constant underwater drilling, the hundreds of simultaneous dynamite blasts required to meet the timeline? We see a result, but not the work. There is a profound disconnect between the savage, untamable environment we see in pre-project engravings, and the clean, industrial precision of the canals that appear just a few years later. The visual record presents us with a finished object, almost as if it were placed there, rather than brutally carved from the earth. The anomaly is not just the scale of the work, but its appearance. It looks too perfect, too controlled. It does not look like the result of a 6-year war waged with black powder and steam in the middle of Europe's most dangerous river. The story collapses entirely when we consider the practical logistics. Let us begin with the location itself. The Iron Gates in the late 19th century was profoundly remote. There were no major industrial centers nearby. No highways. No rail lines leading directly into the heart of the gorge. The very river they were trying to clear was the only viable supply route. Yet it was the obstacle itself. How, precisely, did they transport the necessary equipment and supplies? We are talking about multiple steam-powered dredgers, each weighing hundreds of tons. These had to be built elsewhere, disassembled, transported piece by piece through the mountains or on treacherous barges, and then reassembled on site. We are talking about hundreds of tons of coal, every week, to power these machines. Where did it come from? How was it delivered consistently to a worksite in the middle of a notoriously unpredictable river? And then there is the dynamite. The sheer volume required, as we will later calculate, is staggering. This was not a stable, safe material in the 1890s. It was volatile. Transporting it in massive quantities over rough terrain or water was a disaster waiting to happen. Yet the records are silent on the vast, complex supply chain that would have been the project's lifeblood. Now, consider the manpower. A project of this magnitude would require thousands of laborers. Not hundreds. Thousands. Skilled drillers, explosives experts, engineers, dredger operators, blacksmiths, and an army of manual workers. Where did they live? In the steep, narrow gorge, there is little room for encampments. Housing, feeding, and providing sanitation for a workforce of this size would be a monumental undertaking in itself, a small city erected in the wilderness. The official accounts mention workers, but they do not provide a census. They do not describe the logistics of this temporary city. Where are the records of the inevitable accidents, the disease outbreaks, the sheer human cost that defined every other major engineering project of that century? The construction of the Panama Canal, for instance, is infamous for the tens of thousands of lives it claimed. The Iron Gates project, supposedly just as arduous and dangerous, has a record that is almost silent on the matter. But the greatest impossibility lies in the technology itself. The core of the project was underwater rock removal. Let us be very clear about what this entailed in the 1890s. It meant sending divers or using long drills from barges to bore holes into solid bedrock, sight unseen, through murky, fast-moving water. Then, placing precise amounts of unstable dynamite into these holes, retreating to a safe distance and detonating. Then, somehow, using clam-shell dredgers to find and scoop up the shattered rock from the riverbed. This process would need to be repeated thousands upon thousands of times, day after day, in perfect coordination, in a river known for its violent currents. Any modern engineer will tell you that this is a slow, inefficient, and breathtakingly dangerous process even with today's technology. To suggest that this was accomplished on a scale of millions of cubic meters, in just 72 months, with the primitive tools available, stretches credibility to its breaking point. It is not a question of ingenuity. It is a question of physics. The time, the manpower, the technology, and the logistics, none of them align with the story we are told. The project, as described, was practically impossible. When a story seems impossible, the logical next step is to examine the source. The official account of the Iron Gates project comes from the records of the Austro-Hungarian government and the engineering firms they contracted. One would expect these documents to be filled with meticulous detail. Daily work logs, progress reports, supply manifests, detailed schematics, budget breakdowns, accident reports. This is the standard for any major state-funded enterprise, then and now. When we look at the records for the Suez Canal, we find exhaustive documentation. The same is true for the great railway projects of America. These were points of national pride, and they were documented as such. But when we turn to the Iron Gates, the archives are strangely thin. The documents that exist are high-level. They speak in grand terms. They mention the total budget allocated. They declare the total volume of rock to be removed. They celebrate the heroic efforts of the engineers and the successful completion of the project on time. But they lack the granular, operational data that would prove how it was done. Where are the daily logs detailing how many cubic meters were removed each day from each specific sector? Where are the manifests for the tons of dynamite and coal that were supposedly shipped to the site each week? Where are the detailed worker rosters and payrolls that would confirm a workforce of thousands? The language used is often a template. It reads like a press release, not an engineering report. Phrases about overcoming nature's obstacles and the triumph of modern science are repeated, but the specific, verifiable data points are consistently absent. It is an account of results, not methods. This is a critical red flag. An engineer does not describe a project by simply stating the conclusion. They document the process, the problems, the failures, and the solutions. This detailed record is missing. When researchers have tried to dig deeper, they hit a wall. The specific project files are either gone, or they were never created in the first place. This is completely inconsistent with the bureaucratic nature of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, an entity known for its meticulous record-keeping. Why would the documentation for one of its crowning engineering achievements be so vague? It's as if the story was written after the fact, designed to fit a narrative of national prowess rather than to reflect a real-world construction process. The official story fails because it cannot substantiate itself. It presents a conclusion, a cleared river, and offers a story, but it provides none of the verifiable evidence required to believe that story. The silence in the archives is more telling than the celebratory words in the official summaries. It suggests that there was no process to document, or that the real process was something that could not be admitted. If the clearing of the iron gates were an isolated anomaly, it might be dismissed as a simple case of lost records or historical exaggeration. But it is not isolated. It is part of a distinct global pattern of impossible 19th-century engineering projects, each with a similar, flawed narrative. Let us look at the Corinth Canal in Greece. Opened in 1893, just a few years before the Iron Gates project was completed. It is a channel 4 miles long, carved through solid sedimentary rock, with walls that rise nearly 300 feet. The official story is, again, one of heroic labor with basic machinery and explosives. But look at the canal. The sheer verticality of the walls, the narrow, precise cut. It has long raised questions among independent researchers. The sheer volume of material removed, and the precision of the cut, seem to defy the attributed methods and timeline. Like the Iron Gates, the story is about the result, with the logistical details remaining suspiciously vague. Now, let's establish a realistic baseline. In the United States, the Chesapeake and Ohio Canal required the digging of the Paw Paw Tunnel. This was a tunnel just over 3,000 feet long, dug through solid rock. It was a monumental feat of its time. It took 12 years to complete, from 1836 to 1848, was plagued by violence, budget overruns, and technical failures. It required an immense effort to remove just a fraction of the material excavated at the Iron Gates. This is what real 19th-century rock removal looked like. It was slow, brutal, and incredibly difficult. The Iron Gates project was orders of magnitude larger, supposedly done underwater, and in half the time. The comparison makes the official story completely fall apart. The pattern extends beyond canals. Consider the star forts or bastion forts, found all over the world. These immense, geometric structures of earth and stone are often attributed to the 16th to 18th centuries. The official narrative claims they were built by armies using shovels and wheelbarrows. But the scale, the geometric precision, and the sheer volume of earth moved have led many to question this narrative. The logistics required to build hundreds of these forts, all following a similar complex design, seems far beyond the capabilities of the time. The repeating motif is undeniable. A grand, inexplicable piece of engineering is found. A story is crafted, attributing its creation to the technology and labor of a specific historical period, usually one of national pride. This story always emphasizes heroic effort over technical detail. The timeline is always suspiciously short. And the detailed construction records, the ones that would prove the story, are always missing or inadequate. The Iron Gates is not an anomaly. It is a prime example of this pattern. It is the narrative template applied to a river gorge. The story is the same because the problem is the same, an artifact in the landscape that cannot be explained by the conventional historical timeline. So a story is invented to paper over the impossibility. The story of the Iron Gates is not just practically difficult. A simple mathematical analysis reveals it to be logically incoherent. The official figure, stated in the Austro-Hungarian records, is the removal of over 2.5 million cubic meters of rock. Let us be conservative and use that number, 2,500,000. The project ran from 1890 to 1896, a period of 6 years. Accounting for winters when work on the river would be impossible, and holidays, a generous estimate gives us approximately 2,200 working days. So, we divide the total volume by the number of days. 2,500,000 cubic meters divided by 2,200 days. This gives us a required daily removal rate of 1,136 cubic meters of rock. Every single day for 6 straight years. What does that number actually mean? A cubic meter of the hard gneiss and granite that forms the Iron Gates riverbed weighs approximately 2.7 metric tons. This means the project needed to blast, dredge from the bottom of a fast-flowing river, load onto barges, and transport away over 3,067 tons of rock per day. 3,000 tons. Day in, day out, without fail. For comparison, a modern heavy-duty dump truck can carry about 20 tons. This is the equivalent of over 150 modern truckloads of rock, every day, being pulled from the bottom of a river with 19th-century steam dredgers. Now, let's consider the tool they supposedly used, dynamite. The blasting efficiency in hard rock like granite, especially underwater where tamping is difficult, is low. A conservative estimate from mining manuals of the period and today suggests between 1 and 1.5 kilograms of dynamite is needed to properly shatter 1 cubic meter of this type of rock. Using the low end of that estimate, to remove 1,136 cubic meters of rock, they would need over 1,100 kilograms of dynamite. Every single day. That is more than a metric ton of a highly unstable explosive that had to be manufactured, carefully transported into a remote gorge, and then deployed by hand in precise underwater boreholes. The sheer industrial capacity to produce and deliver this quantity of explosives is a massive question in itself. But the core problem remains the removal rate. No quarrying operation in the world in the 1890s, working in ideal, dry conditions, could sustain a removal rate of 3,000 tons per day. The claim that this was achieved at the bottom of a treacherous river gorge is not just unlikely, it is an absurdity. The numbers do not lie. They do not have a political agenda or a national narrative to uphold. And the numbers tell us that the official story of the Iron Gates is a fiction. The work that was done does not match the tools they told us they used. The equation is broken. One of the variables must be wrong. If the official narrative is a fabrication, what is the alternative? We must construct a hypothesis that fits the evidence, one that does not resort to fantasy, but relies on a controlled, logical explanation. The fundamental contradiction is this. The result of the project, the precisely cut, massive canals, is far too advanced for the supposed methods and timeline. This leaves two possibilities. Either the methods were far more advanced than we are told, or the project itself was not what they claimed it was. Let us explore the second possibility, as it requires fewer assumptions. What if the 1890 to 1896 project was not one of creation, but of restoration? What if the primary channels, the deep cuts in the bedrock, already existed? This hypothesis suggests that the Austro-Hungarian engineers did not carve the Sip Canal from virgin rock, but rather cleared it of millennia of accumulated silt, debris, and rockfalls. The 2.5 million cubic meters of removed material was not mostly solid bedrock, but a much smaller amount of hard rock combined with a larger volume of softer, easier to remove sediment. This immediately solves the mathematical impossibility. Dredging sand and gravel is exponentially faster and easier than blasting and dredging solid granite. A project to clear an existing channel is far more plausible within the 6-year timeframe than a project to create one from scratch. This explanation also accounts for the visual anomalies. The clean, precise cuts in the stone were not made by 19th-century dynamite because they were not made in the 19th century. They were the product of the original builders, who possessed a technology capable of cutting and shaping rock with a precision we cannot explain. The Austro-Hungarians simply uncovered this work. The official story was then crafted as a cover. Why? The reasons could be numerous. National pride is the most obvious. It is far more impressive to claim you tamed a river than to admit you simply cleaned out an ancient structure. Control is another reason. To reveal that a sophisticated, ancient canal system existed would invite questions. Who built it? When? What technology did they use? These questions would rewrite European history. By claiming the work as their own, the Austro-Hungarian Empire could control the narrative, claim a great technological victory, and avoid the destabilizing implications of the discovery. They would be seen as masters of nature, rather than inheritors of a forgotten technology. This restoration hypothesis is the most economical explanation. It accounts for the impossible timeline, the absurd logistics, the lack of detailed records, and the precise, anomalous appearance of the finished canals. The project was real, the workers were real, the dredgers were real. But their task was fundamentally different from the one in the history books. They were not builders. They were janitors, cleaning up a structure far older and more advanced than their own civilization. We are left with an undeniable object and an unbelievable story. The Iron Gates today stands as a navigable, vital artery of European commerce. The official history books credit this to a 6-year flurry of dynamite and steam at the end of the 19th century. But the evidence, when examined without prejudice, tells a different story. The logistics do not work. The math does not add up. The visual record is inconsistent. The official documentation is a hollow shell. To believe the official story, you must believe in a miracle of engineering that defies the known capabilities of the age, a project that somehow overcame impossible odds with none of the expected human or material cost, leaving behind almost no detailed proof of its own process. The alternative is not to believe in a fantasy, but to accept a simple, logical deduction. When the story does not fit the facts, the story is probably wrong. The canals of the iron gates are real. Their existence is a fact. But their origin story is a narrative, crafted to serve a purpose. We are not saying we know who, or what, truly carved the Danube's path. We are simply observing that the official account is not a sufficient explanation. This is a call not for answers, but for questions. To look at the great works of the past, whether they are canals, cathedrals, or fortresses, and to ask a simple question: does the story make sense? When you begin to look at the world this way, you will find that the iron gates are not an exception. They are the rule. The landscape is filled with evidence that does not align with the history we have been taught. All that is required is to look. If you find value in this method of inquiry, in questioning the accepted narratives through logic and evidence, consider following our work. The archive is vast, and there is much more to uncover.